Hey everyone, it's Jack, and today I'm going to do a follow-up to the Garuda first look that I did last week with Garuda Hyprland. And Hyprland is a Wayland tiling compositor / window manager / desktop environment all set up here. And so Garuda did a really fantastic job here, but I want to kind of give you my experience over the past week using Hyprland on the Garuda Linux and what my experiences were. I'm on my actual daily driven desktop here, and I'm just going to switch over to desktop 1. So this is my default desktop right now, and so I'm on Workspace 1. And so this is just kind of what it looks like, and it's got the alternating wallpaper, which I really like, set up here by default again. And then, as you can see up here on my Waybar, I have it a little less cluttered, because I found it to be a little bit cluttered there. In fact, I even got a comment from Gorum Knight, who also had mentioned the same thing, and I totally agree with that. I felt like it was a little cluttered too. So I kind of lightened it up, and I'll kind of get to that in a minute, because even though my overall experience was really smooth and really exciting to have such a nice Hyprland config, I did have some little issues that I ran into as I used it over time here. And like I said, I've been running this for a little over a week now. And in the past, I had run Hyprland on Pure Arch, and also I set it up on OpenSUSE, which really worked great. And that's one thing I got to say about OpenSUSE over Fedora is Fedora, if you wanted to set up Hyprland, not so easy. In fact, I really couldn't get it working in a timely manner, and finally I just said, forget it, it's not worth it. So I went over to OpenSUSE, which I kind of like better anyway, and on OpenSUSE it worked just fine. So outside of Arch, if you're looking for some Arch alternative, OpenSUSE might be something to consider. With that said, let's run into the first issue I ran into. So I'm going to open up my file manager real quick. And the keyboard shortcut on this is Super N, and that opens up your file manager. Originally, I had the keyboard shortcut for my other window manager as Super Shift Return to open up the file manager. And it's a little bit different here on Hyprland. And I thought about changing it, but actually the Super N I thought was kind of nice. So I decided to stay with it. N for nice. So enough of my babbling. So here on the file manager, by default, Garuda has the icon view enabled, and so this is kind of what you see. And if I were going to hide the dot files by pressing Control-H, this is a little bit more what you would see. Of course, I have my own files in here as well. But there was an issue I experienced in my file manager, and that issue was that if I wanted to copy or move files from one folder to another, what was happening was I would either right-click and hit copy, or just use my keyboard shortcut and do Control-C, and then maybe go to another tab and paste something into another folder. And what would happen was that it would say that there was nothing on the clipboard to copy over. And I thought, well, that's kind of strange. So I would go back to my original folder, right-click or Control-C again and copy, and then go back to the folder, and then it would work. So it turned out that I had to hit Control-C, copy, or move, Control-X to had the same issue. I had to press that twice and then go over, and then I could paste it in. And same with the right-click. If you right-clicked and did a copy or a cut for a file or a folder, and then go to your new folder, then it would work as long as you did it twice. So you would have to go like copy and then right-click, copy again, and then go to the other folder, and then it would paste it in. So that was really strange, and I thought, well, maybe that's just a Thunar problem. So I went in and installed Dolphin instead. I tried it, had the same issue. So that kind of ruled out Thunar. Then I downloaded Nemo and tried that, same issue. So at that point, I decided it is not a file manager issue. Also, I could go into my file editor, like Genie, and I could go in here and just copy some text and paste it right in to another line, and it worked just fine. So I didn't have to do it twice there. So then I decided it's got to be something to do with beyond a file manager. It's got to be maybe something related to the clipboard. So I got into my config file, and I just kind of looked for the reference for the clipboard. Just to find it real quick, I think I just did a Control-F and typed in clip. and then it took me down into this line here. And so what I did was I had an old copy of my hyprland config from my OpenSUSE. And in OpenSUSE, the only line I had in there was this, which was exec once WL paste watch cliphist store. So it was using cliphist, whereas the Garuda is using copyq and clipman. So it had these references here originally. So what I did was I went ahead and I just installed cliphist from the terminal. And once I installed that, then I just copied and pasted this line from my old config into here. And then I commented these out. I could have deleted them, but I wanted to keep them there for reference in case I'd ever want them in the future. It would be a lot easier to switch back. But I'm real happy with this because this actually solved the problem. And so now I can copy and paste files from one folder to another without any issue at all. So that was my first little thing that I had to fix there on Garuda. And that solved that. Now, with that said, that could be a little bug that gets fixed in a future update and may have nothing to do with Garuda, actually. It could be some issue with copyq or something related there. So, yeah, hard to say. And then another thing that I experienced, and this really has nothing to do with Garuda, this is more just a Wayland thing, is when I use archivers and I go into a zip file like this, then I like to be able to just drag and drop the zip file right out into the file manager. But that never really works in Wayland. Wayland is just not friendly when it comes to drag and drop in some situations, and the archiver is one of them. So to me, that was kind of a mild, irritation, but nothing serious because all you have to do really is just hit extract and extract the file manually this way, and you're good. And so that is really kind of a non-issue, but I thought I'd throw it out there in case you're really kind of anal about drag and drop. However, it works fine in my Firefox browser. Now in Brave browser, it was a little bit flaky. If I was going to drag and drop a file to upload, say to a website, then like to my GitHub, for example, then it was a little flaky. You had to kind of try it 2 or 3 times and get it in just the right spot to get it to actually work. And I think I had the same issue in Chromium. However, in Firefox, it's not an issue at all. It just works perfectly. The other thing that I think is kind of interesting is if you go the opposite way, if I was going to take, say, this file and drag it into my archiver, it works just fine. The drag and drop works in that direction. You just can't go the other way and bring it out to your desktop. So that's kind of weird. I guess that's progress. And, Wayland is still evolving. So one of these days it might just work. Well, then the next thing I encountered was that when I first booted in, if I was going to open up my file manager, it took about 30 seconds for it to actually open up. And so a lot of times I thought the file manager isn't even opening, so I'd try again and then again. And all of a sudden, 30 seconds later, I'd get 3 instances of the file manager opening up. And it didn't take me long to figure out that it was taking about 30 seconds for the file manager to open. So that was kind of a drag. And what I did there was I did a little bit of Google searching, and I found out that if I went into my hyprland config file and added this line here, then that fixed the issue. And what this is this is importing the environment display Wayland display xdg_current desktop. And that fixed the problem. After I logged back out and logged back in, it worked just fine. And so for me, that took care of it. Of course, your mileage may vary depending on your configuration and hardware and so forth, but for me, that seemed to work. I had a similar issue when I was running it. I think it was on PureArch. And in that case, I think I had to remove or uninstall xdg_GNOME desktop, I think. If I remember right, the deal was that I was running 2 at the same time, and I think I had to use xdg hyprland git or something. I can't remember now. But that could be another situation where you run into something similar. However, the Google search was pretty easy, so it didn't take me long to find the solution for that one. And again, that had really nothing to do with Garuda itself, but more of just kind of a Hyprland quirk, I think. Also, I wanted to kind of do a little tweak to the nwg-bar. The nwg-bar is your power bar. Like when you hit the power button up here, then it brings up your nwg-bar, your power bar. And I really like this bar. I think it's really kind of cool. And nwg-bar is something I haven't used in previous versions of Hyprland. And in my previous versions, when I get to the power bar, I would simply hit S or L to log out. And that was really convenient, and it would just take me straight out to where I wanted to go. However, on this, it didn't seem to have any keyboard shortcuts, so I couldn't really just do that. I had to actually go up here and click. And for me, it's kind of nice to be able to just use Super Shift E. That's how you get to this menu if you use your keyboard shortcuts, and then just continue using another keyboard stroke to get out and shut down or reboot. And I couldn't do that. So I did a little bit of investigating, and of course I had to go into my nwg-bar config, and there's a file called bar.json, and so that's right here, and this is kind of all in yellow text, so it's not real easy to see, I guess. And so I'm going to bring that up so it's easier to see. Here we got our configuration file, and this is actually located in your .config folder, nwg-launchers/nwg-bar/bar.json, and that's what this is. So to enable keyboard bindings, I found in the documentation that what you want to do is put an underscore next to the command, and that underscore will allow you to use the Alt key along with the first letter of the command. So for example, here we got name for logout and for reboot and for shutdown. So what I did was I added an underscore in front of each one of these. So that underscore kind of denotes the Alt key. I guess you could think of it that way. So with that underscore, that tells the script to use a keyboard shortcut, a key binding. So to log out, now all I have to do once I get to my NWG power bar is to hit Alt-L, and then you would instantly log out. Or you would press Alt-R to reboot or Alt-S to instantly shut down. So that's how you do that. So those key bindings aren't in there by default. And for me, I kind of like those key bindings, so I added that in. And if you like key bindings for the same reason on the power menu, then that's how you can solve that issue right there. And so technically, I guess it's not really an issue. It's just something that wasn't enabled. And that took care of that. And finally, the last issue I ran into was with OBS Studio. Surprise! Yeah, so on OBS Studio, originally I had OBS Studio installed as a flat pack because I typically use it as a flat pack. And the flat pack version, for some reason, when you opened up OBS Studio, and I'll just bring it over here right now, even though I'm recording. But what would happen is the issue was in my screen capture, your screen capture pipe wire. And so if I selected the screen capture, was just black. So you would have a black screen up here. And if you went into the screen capture properties, in your select monitor area, it was just black. And if you hit select monitor, there was nothing to select. So it just didn't work at all. I had no screen capture ability at all. So what I ended up having to do was I had to get rid of the flat pack OBS Studio and just install it from the repos. But then, oh yes, there's always a but then. I couldn't launch it. What happened was there was no launching of OBS Studio, so I went into the console and tried to launch it from the console, and that way I could see what was happening. And so when I launched it from the console, I was getting this message, could not find the Qt platform plugin Wayland. I'm like, what? So I couldn't even launch OBS Studio at all. But it turned out what the issue was quite simple. Qt 6 was not installed at all. Apparently Qt 5 was installed, I think, but not Qt 6. So I had to do a sudo pacman -s Qt 6, Qt6, and then that solved the issue. So it installed the Qt 6 framework, and that's kind of strange because I would think that that would just automatically install as a dependency when you installed OBS Studio from the repo, but it didn't. So that solved the issue. Once I installed the Qt 6 platform, everything was fine, and it launched, and now it's working just fine. No issues at all after that. So that was my final challenge here in Garuda Hyprland to get it all working. So yes, little minor things like that, and some people might consider that major if you're not really experienced with window managers or just kind of tweaking your own system. So those were kind of the issues. They were really a combination of Wayland issues and Hyprland issues more than anything. But for the suggestion box, I have a feeling the Garuda team will probably be alerted to that in time also, and probably just kind of tweak their next version accordingly. They kind of address some of those out of the box, I would think. So again, just little tweaks, and whenever I install a new window manager, whether it's Qtile or BSPWM or whatever the case may be, there's usually little adjustments I got to make anyways, because typically I'm going to tweak it to make it my own anyway. So I really go into it expecting to put a little bit of time into it anyway. And the time that I put into this to kind of fix those little issues really was minimal. But if you're using Garuda and you kind of run into those, yeah, that's kind of a thing. That might save you a little bit of time. So beyond that, really, all I did from there was just kind of declutter the Waybar. The Waybar really had a whole bunch of stuff that went all the way across pretty much. And so if you were into something like Firefox, it would show the URL up here and just kind of crowd everything because there was so much up here, and there's still quite a bit up here. I actually, even though I cleaned this up a lot, I could really, if I wanted to, shorten the weather module up here to just display the temperature and maybe the icon here. Don't really need all the other stuff in there like the wind direction and so forth, because really I could just click on that and kind of see all that anyway in the pop-up window. The cheat sheet is another thing I don't really need there anymore, but that's nice to have in the beginning to just kind of get an idea of what your default key bindings are. But I've changed some of those anyways to my own taste. However, it is kind of nice to have a reference, but once you got that really down, then you don't have to have that in there either. So you could really kind of remove that at some point as well, and that kind of declutters it a bit too. And of course, to do that, all I had to do was go into my file manager, Super N, and my config file, and then Waybar. So Waybar is the folder that you want to use, and then the config file is here. Here you got modules right, and modules right, this is where everything is located here. That's all the clutter. So what I did was I actually just copied this line and pasted it below, and then commented out the original line. That way I could refer back to it easily if I wanted to put something back in. So then in my new modules right line, I just deleted some of the things I didn't really feel like was necessary. And once I did that, then I just logged out, logged back in, and then my bar was a lot more friendly. And so that, because there were some things I really didn't need on here, like the battery and the network. I also shortened that out too, because the network up here originally displayed the IP address kind of like this. Now it'll display it if you click on it and then open up your window, which is cool. But I really didn't feel like I needed that because when you mouse over it, you can see the IP address anyway. So I'd rather just mouse over it and look at the IP instead of just having it displayed all the time. So what I did there was in my config file, I just went down to where it shows your network reference here in your file. And that is right down here. So what I did was, again, where it shows format Ethernet, here it's showing the IF name, the IP address, and so forth. So I just copied this again, pasted it down below, and then I changed it to only show the IF name, your interface name, and of course I left this here commented out for reference in the future in case I ever want to change it back for some reason. So this new format for me was much more pleasing. So I have it just like this where it's only showing the interface name up here. And for me, that's just fine. And again, I could do the same with the weather. I could shorten the weather here if I wanted to as well. So that kind of tidied up my Waybar a bit. And another thing I wanted to change was following to another workspace. And what I mean by that is, for example, if I go to Workspace 1 here and I wanted to move this, let's say to Workspace 6, the keyboard shortcut is Super Shift 6. And then that would move it right over to Workspace 6. And then you can see I go to 6 here, it follows it over. But originally it didn't do that. Once I moved it to Workspace 6, then I would still be on Workspace 1. And I would have to go over here and click to Workspace 6 to actually get there. So I wanted Hyprland to follow it over to 6 when I did that. So what I had to do was do a modification in my Hyprland config file. And that is actually an easy fix if you know the trick. All you got to do is go down to where it shows your key bindings for moving a window, which is right here. And so these move active window to a workspace using mod shift and then 1, 2, 3 through 0. And originally what you had here was move network space silent. And so what move network space silent means is that it will not follow to that workspace. So if you want to be able to follow to a workspace, then you got to change move to workspace silent to move to workspace. Just like above here, we have move to workspace for these alt settings. And for me, I could have just used Alt Shift 1, 2, 3, 4 to follow it. However, I decided just to use main mod shift, just shift 1, 2, 3, 4. And really, it would make more sense to take, for me anyways, to take move network space silent, copy that, and then just change all these to that. And I think I'll do that anyways, now that I'm thinking about it. So move to network space silent, for me, would be better to use with the Alt Shift instead of the Mod Shift 1. So since I'm on here right now, I'm just going to do that real quick. There, that looks good. So I'm just going to save that. And now essentially I have these reversed. So now network space silent is up here with the Alt Shift key binding, and move to network space is down here with the Super Shift key binding. Therefore, if I go back to Workspace 1 and I want to move this Thunar over to Workspace 6, if I do Super Shift 6, it'll send it over there and it'll take me with it. So now I'm on Workspace 6 and I just followed Thunar right over to Workspace 6. But if I don't want to follow, let's say I want to send it back to Workspace 1, then now I can just use the Alt Shift and 1, and then it sent it off to Workspace 1, but I'm still on 6. So there are cases where I don't want to follow it. So I do want to have both. It's just that I wanted to use it in reverse to the default config here on Garuda, because on BSPWM, I would follow to the workspace using the key binding Super Shift and then the workspace number. So for me, that's just more comfortable, and that's why I reversed that here. But I like the fact that it's already configured with both options, and I think that's another big plus for the Garuda people. And then, of course, I just kind of modified my own key bindings in here to work with my own personal stuff. So, for example, some of my trading software I like to play with MetaTrader, I got my key binding set up. And I also have the workspaces specified in here for some of the apps. For example, I would like MetaTrader and MetaEditor to open up on Workspace 3. And so to do that, all you got to do is just in brackets specify your workspace number here. In this case, workspace space 3 inside the brackets. And then every time you run this, it'll open up automatically in workspace 3 and take you there. So that's kind of nice. And same with OBS Studio. I got that opening in workspace 5, and Firefox opens up in workspace 2 and so forth. So these are things that I really like about Hyprland, is it makes it really easy to work in the config files. For me, everything's very intuitive, and I like that. I think that's a real plus. And also I have this binding here for OBS Studio. If you might have noticed, there's 2 references to OBS. So first of all, I got an opening here in Workspace 5, but then you see this other binding here where you have Control-Alt-Z, and then we got this pass parameter, and then you got this little thingy here, which is Shift 6. It's a little kind of looks like a greater than sign that's tipped on its side there, pointing upwards. So, and then a reference to COM OBS Project Studio. The problem I was having was when I was in OBS Studio, if I use the key binding, for example, to pause recording, I use Control-Alt-Z, and that pauses my recording. However, if I was like, say, over here on Workspace 1, and I press Control-Alt-Z, it would not pause. But that was the purpose for this line. So that was the fix to allow the key bindings to work across different workspaces. The other thing I did was I put a reference in here for mirroring my monitors. Sometimes I like to hook up my TV using my HDMI cable to the computer and then just kind of mirror it onto the TV set from my computer. So I have a line here that I keep commented out unless I hook it up, and then I will uncomment that, and then it's good. Or actually, I'll copy and paste this and put it down here instead. And so what that does is it allows me to mirror my monitors. But the reason I do it this way is because sometimes I unplug the monitor. I just don't want to, for one reason or another. Not very often, but sometimes I do. And when I unplug it, it automatically rewrites the config file and sets up the proper monitor configuration for the way it is now. So I just kind of keep this up here as a reference. But if you want to know how to mirror your monitors, this is all you got to do. So what it's doing is it's calling to take my HDMI monitor, which is my TV set, and mirror my computer monitor, which is this guy, EDP-1. So that was actually the kind of the final tweak that I did in the config file. So I didn't really have to do a lot to the config file because the Hyprland config file was really kind of set up very nice just as it was. And the other thing I think is really great with the Garuda setup is it's not that complicated. When you're in the config file, all you got really is the Waybar, your nwg-bar for your power strip, and then your Hyprland folder, which really is just your Hyprland comp file. And then you got a scripts folder here, which has your sleep script and your lock screen script in there as well. So I like that. Very simple, very straightforward. There's not a whole lot of embedded stuff and separate key binding files and all that. So it keeps it very simple, and I think that is cool. I like that a lot. I did have to change my filtering in OBS Studio because for some reason on Wayland, in my mic settings, of all things, and I can't really explain why this happens. Apparently it's related to Pipewire, maybe. But if I go into my filters, this is my filter setup right now, which I'm using noise suppression, an equalizer, compressor, and limiter. And under noise suppression, before I was using Speaks, because that worked just fine. In fact, it worked a little bit better than RN noise when I was on Xorg. However, Speaks does not work well on Wayland, at least not for me. I get this funny sound in the background. It kind of sounds like water bubbling, like you would hear in an aquarium or boiling water. That was kind of irritating, and no matter where I set that, I was getting that sound. So I went with RN noise, which is where we're at now, and everything worked just fine. And so this is a setting that I use now, and so that was the only other tweak that I had to make. But other than that, I am having no Wayland issues at all, other than that minor drag and drop thing from the archiver, which I showed you earlier. And really, to me, that's not even enough of an issue to even worry about. So, yes. And of course, Hyprland is just such a wonderful experience. I mean, the animations, opening and closing windows and switching workspaces is just really fantastic. I just really love the experience. It's really a very fluid and smooth experience, and everything is so comfortable. I can't even imagine going back to a floating window manager anymore. When I play around on XFCE and KDE, and XFCE is still probably my favorite floating desktop. However, I just feel so clumsy in the floating desktop environments now because it's really so much nicer to be able to just have the tiling window managers and being able to have things open up side by side. For example, being in your web browser and then needing to drag and drop a file from your file manager, having your file manager just pop up automatically right next to your web browser and drag it in there. Or if you had to refer to a text file for whatever reason to copy and paste into something you're editing online, it's just so much more convenient and so much easier that I actually feel clumsy in the floating desktop environments now. So I have completely been converted. Probably thanks to Derek Taylor from DT, because he had been using those for years. And for years, I always thought he was kind of nutty for wanting to use a tiling window manager because I kind of saw it as the hard way to do things. But I see the light now. And Hyprland to me is like the cutting edge, coolest tiling compositing manager that I've ever seen. So for me, it's kind of like my home now, and I feel right at home on Hyprland, not only because it's a pleasure to use and aesthetically pleasing, but the configuration files are just so easy and intuitive for me to read and to work with. So it's just a win-win all the way around. It's 5 stars all the way. So I am loving this, and I love the way Garuda got this all set up. And for me, it's just a winner. So I'm happy with it, and that's my review and my experience after using Garuda for over a week. And I have a feeling I'm going to probably be sticking with this for a pretty long time. And with that, I hope all this babbling and this little tour was helpful. And if it was, don't forget to leave that thumbs up and hit subscribe. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next time.